We need to talk about something very important, and that is the idea that money is not the root cause problem in this world, and therefore is not the root cause solution. Because I'm looking at money, the whole idea, right? The whole idea that money is this root cause. So money is clearly a lot of people's religion, and when I say religion, I refer to the fact that limits them. It is what their whole world consists of. I need money for this, I need money for that, and people feel like they're essentially slaves to money. Because they are. And so, yes, money is a problem, but can it be the root cause problem? And is it the solution just giving people money, or just focusing on money in general? I'm going to have to say it isn't. Okay, so I'm going to share some different perspectives of view, including a chart, one that I've shared across many of my older videos, and we're going to talk about this because this goes into detail what it's about. Okay, but let's first talk about a notion that I think is really important, and that is the idea that knowledge is more important. Okay, and in my recent presentations, my naturosophy and other videos I've done, I've stressed the need for knowledge. Even Socrates said, the only good is knowledge, the only evil is ignorance. But then he also said, that the only thing he does know is that he knows nothing. So interesting, the only good is knowledge, but that knowledge is that he knows nothing. So if you want to live in a world where it's voluntary, where you don't want people imposing their will on others and telling others how to live their own life, then you're essentially saying no one person has the solution for everybody. No one is claiming to know how everything should get done. And that debunks a lot of politics today, because a lot of people in politics claim to know how things should get done and how society should work. They want their will imposed upon others. Well, in the case of money, or saying it's any one problem, we might be imposing our will, saying, this is really what we have to look at, when clearly there's a lot of other factors, right? It's not just money, it's greed, the insatiable sensation of wanting money, right? That need for money, the emptiness in our hearts of not having something that we are supposed to have as human beings, and thus needing material things of all kinds, whether it's money or something else. Right, there's a lot of other things we can look at, but of course, yes, money is one big problem. Now, the reason why knowledge would be also more important is not just because it's how to deal with your money or how you acquire money, but it's what do you do with it, right? How responsible are you with that money? It details not just the foundations, but also the ending. See, because if you're irresponsible, you're going to lose what you have. And if you are responsible, then you maintain good ownership and proper use of what you have, and people see it. And so knowledge is very important. That's the whole reason why we have education, is to say, well, we want order, we want people, doing this or that, and we want people to see their options, and they're not limited to this or that. And clearly money has also gotten in the way of people's education, sure. But what about the education system itself? Is that not a problem? Because it is. Not just the money that prevents people from that education, but the education itself. Or the teachers involved, the people involved thinking that that's their only solution. And all these different factors that all rely on knowledge, which is, again, how you sort of acquire money in the first place, a different form of wealth. It could be anything that you are trading people with, and it doesn't have to be limited to just one form of currency. See, I call money currency because it is something that is worth value to you. Love can be worth value to you. Family could be worth value to you. Your own life is worth value to you. You can see these as even more important than the idea of physical money, because one is a spiritual, may you say, principle, and the other one is physical, right? And so they have very stark differences between the two, and so it depends on what you think then is money. Okay, so that's another point to make, and therefore you have to see that it's all then dependent on knowledge. See, the elites don't need money. They want knowledge. They need knowledge. And the reason why is because they need to know how to keep their control. Because so long as people have the ability to control others, they can get whatever they want. Money is not actually a concern for the people in control of the world. Or it's not really a concern for anybody who has a constant flow of influence that they can just gain money anytime, or have so much money they don't even know what to do with it, and you actually see it makes them quite unhappy. But then you see it's like, well, this person, if they had money, they would be much happier. right? But also, would they? And to how much money are we talking? So this is the deal, right? Money, it's keeping people fighting, right? They want people fighting, the people who are in power, which I don't like to talk about. I don't like to say they, because we need to look at ourselves. We are the ones who put them in power. We say we are the government. We say, we are the ones who give them that power. So if that's the focus, then why are we looking at the elites to begin with? But nonetheless, they want to keep people fighting so they can keep their control. And they will always have money and anything they want from that. So it's just something to keep note of. It's the slave that's on the plantation and the slave master who's benefiting off of that slave. And even if the slave is given better conditions, they still believe they're supposed to be a slave. And the slave master still has them because of their knowledge. Their knowledge of how to control their mind. Their knowledge of how to get them to do things against their own will. That's all a matter of willpower, of spiritual principles that go way beyond money. See, because again, if you are irresponsible with your own property, you're going to give it away or you're not going to be able to maintain it. So who's in control of your property? In the case of our body, our own sovereignty, if we're saying that we want people to be free, money is not going to free them. Understanding freedom and understanding your sovereignty is what's going to free you, because mental slavery leads to all physical slavery, and physical slavery is upheld through mental slavery. So even if you give people physical means of freedom, if they're not free mentally, none of it matters. Mental freedom is what really matters toward creating the change we want, and therefore that is totally outside the realm of money, although it can of course help you in different regards, sort of with the manifestations in the physical. So again, there's something way deeper than this physical thing we call money, and it is called knowledge, it's called sovereignty, it's called willpower, it's called morality, and those things should be taught. There should be an emphasis on education. And so knowledge isn't knowledge if it deceives. Keep that in mind. If it distracts. Knowledge helps people. It is moral. Because if knowledge is knowledge, then it's something that we need to know. It's something that we have to know. And therefore it is moral. Knowledge is the only good. Ignorance is the only evil. And I talk about this in my presentation. I go in detail and I share a bunch of quotes. Okay, and again, it isn't knowledge if it deceives or it distracts. So if we think and know and say, well, money's going to solve everybody's problems, is our knowledge holistic? Is it keeping account all the different factors? Because I'm going to share with you a chart called the Tytler cycle. Now, this cycle is one like I said, I've talked about on my channel before. Okay, and I have videos dedicated to this, and I said there's only one way you can end this cycle. So let's say we were to give people money, or let's say we were to say money is the root cause of the problem here. It's causing apathy, dependence, and bondage, we might say, right? We might say we are at the state of apathy and dependence, right? And that we are actually in bondage, which you may call slavery or tyranny, or it says people oppose the conditions. Well, what comes right after bondage? Faith, then courage, then liberty, then abundance. Well, what if we were to jump right to abundance? You say, okay, well, let's just get more money into people's hands. And there's a lot of people who talk about this in different factions of, people who want freedom. They think, well, if we can use the system and get people what they need, then they will become free over time. Well, you see in the chart, liberty comes before abundance, but nonetheless, if I were to go right to abundance, you see what comes right after abundance is selfishness. Selfishness, it's all about me and my stuff, and then complacency, entitlement, and self-absorption, and then apathy, personal responsibility is lost. People say it's not my fault, pointing at others, saying it's them, and then you have apathy. Freedom is centralized and independence is controlled. People become order followers. So how do you end this cycle? Well, I've identified it 2 years ago quite a bit, that this cycle can be ended right between selfishness and abundance. Because it doesn't have to be selfishness. Selfishness doesn't have to be fed into. You have to question what gives someone power. And if I said that it's people that give other people power because there's millions of people following one person or millions of people following few people, that doesn't sound so right. Does that sound right to you? And can you give somebody rights that don't exist in nature? So what I'm saying is, if you are saying this person's a policeman, this person's a politician, can they do what we can't do ourselves? What gives them that right? Is it a natural right? No, it's a man-made right. It's one that we assume they are authority, they have this position, they have this title, they have this outfit, and it therefore assumes that they have more rights than their fellow man. This belief that people can do this is called statism. And when you cut the ability to give people power away, then selfishness does not go many places. People cannot go into apathy, dependence, and bondage. Personal responsibility is not lost because people understand what it means to have self-ownership. They understand what slavery is. They understand what statism is. This is all one and the same, which is the reason why I created a book called Slavery Gone for Good, which is really simple. And it's not hard to understand that you own yourself and should not do violence to another, that you should not suppress your conscience, that you should always think for yourself and do what you know to be right versus wrong, instead of just doing what you're told. And so that is the very understanding of statism, which is not taught if we're talking about money. Money has nothing to do with that situation. Now, I'm not going to say money is worthless, right? Because obviously we are identifying and saying it has some sort of value, but is it more valuable than knowledge itself or morality itself, that of which controls what we do with that money, that of which controls how that money is utilized? So from abundance to selfishness, you can see that abundance can be controlled and limited by people saying, well, there shouldn't be one person in control of everything. And that's where anarchism comes in. That's where abolitionism comes in, where people recognize that statism is when you give someone that power to be selfish and say that's okay. To say it's okay for people to be complacent, to follow orders, to suppress their conscience, and to believe that someone has more rights than them. So that ends this entire Tytler cycle, and a lot of people, although this cycle is very true historically because it has always happened, a lot of people don't understand what statism is, not even Tytler himself, I'm sure. Right? And he understood, like, this is where every civilization goes. It's a cycle that is pretty much inevitable so long as you have a government. But if you don't have a government, can you give any people power? Can you give way to more selfishness? Can you give way to apathy and complacency? And the truth is, no. If you're in a free world, people are obligated to be responsible and to be sovereign. In fact, in order to achieve a free world, people have to be sovereign and not have apathy, not have a lack of self-responsibility. So if you give people freedom, it's simply through money, it's not enough, because there needs to be a freedom in the mind. There needs to be a freedom in the hearts of people. Okay, so knowledge is the good, but what if you keep that good for yourself? That's where selfishness comes in. And if you keep it for yourself, you're keeping that knowledge away from other people. And if you think of the elites, they're not just keeping money away for themselves, they're keeping knowledge away for themselves. How the system operates, what they're doing behind the scenes, false flag operations, set up this event here, set up this event here, Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. They do this on a continual basis to continue their control of the mind, because everything they do is a mental trick. Propaganda is a mind machine. They know that our minds create the world, and therefore if they can control the television or the culture or the arts, they can control everything else. So if you're not influencing that through the education, well, what are you really changing? It's the same for the people who are invested in politics. If they're playing the same system of games and government, yet they proclaim that the government is the problem, are you really going to fix the problem? Again, you're focused on this material fixation of, I need this title, I need this badge, I need this position, but you're not looking at morality alone, the education of it. And I get it, it's hard, people aren't interested in morality, but it must be taught. And it's one that leads to all our freedoms, inevitably because you understand what you own yourself. It's understanding that slavery needs to end, whether it's in the 1800s or now, when we're talking about political or economic slavery. All that, if it's still slavery, we need to understand it's a moral issue. Okay, so if you recognize that there is economic slavery, then I hope you don't just look at the economic side of it, but you look at the slavery side of it, because that's what it constitutes. Otherwise, what about these other forms of slavery? Do you not see that economics is tied into everything else in this world? Just as I can say politics is tied into everything else in this world. And does these things have to be centralized? Do these things have to have power and select individuals involved? No, they do not. And that's why statism is the most important. I said, again, the number one thing we know is that we know nothing. I'm not claiming to know anything. I'm not claiming to have the only solution. I talked about this before with hardheads and the non-ego ego. The point is that with statism, your will can be done on others. How you want the world to be done is pushed upon others by violence, backed by violence. Every law in man's government is backed by violence. Whereas if you cut that tie and you say you can't do that because it's immoral, all law is immoral because all law is slavery, it's coercing people against their will, and people understand that, then law will not exist, government will not exist, and people will live in a voluntary society where things, yes, will rise and fall. There's always going to be conflicts, there's always going to be chaos, but people will see that it's natural as it comes with freedom, as long as they be responsible for themselves and do not suppress their conscience, because they understand statism, then nothing will get centralized. No evil will become centralized. See, there's always going to be evil, but the question is how much will it grow? And you limit that through understanding statism. Okay, so you can't limit government, but you can limit evil, and that is essentially what you do. So my question is, will they teach what good is, or will they create dependence? You know, if we're dependent on material things, whether it be money, because you're saying this is what's going to free everyone, you're still saying they have to be dependent on this thing for their freedoms. Are you going to teach what that good is? You know, if there's good that is being kept hidden from people, knowledge that is being kept hidden from people, are you going to teach what that knowledge is? Of how mind control has been used against the populace? Because that, if they understand how control works, how power is in its nature, then no tyranny can grow again. It's getting to the root cause of the problem rather than looking at the symptoms. And so, poor and wealthy, but you're not a king. You know, this whole idea of, well, you're not this, you're not that, and therefore you have less rights or more rights. I mean, you know, all this comes down to knowledge. Money is also important in the lens of ownership, fruits of labor, free markets. It isn't the solution either. You need to know what to do with that, right? You need to know what to do with the freedom that you're given. This is why people can identify problems within free markets. Why I can say that, you know, ANCAPs or different forms of anarchism, all these different long lists of ideologies can have problems, because every idea that exists out there exists for a reason, and there's reasons why people follow it, and there's reasons why people find legitimacy and find a lot of good meaning in it. The difference again is, are you going to say this is the idea that must be followed and it must be backed by violence? If you're going to achieve a better world and you're doing it all voluntarily, I applaud you. But I want you to educate people about morality, so that way people continue to make sure it's voluntary. You know, if you care about love, if you care about order, freedom, knowledge, sovereignty, then you'll teach about morality, because that is what love is. That is what order is. It's when you have a moral society. The only evil is ignorance, because you're saying, I don't want to follow my conscience. I know something is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyways, like in the case of World War II and democide, the #1 cause of unnatural death. If you are closed-minded to the knowledge, even the knowledge that you have innately, you aren't receptive. You are ignorant. If you don't want me questioning and saying, well, is economics the way to solve the world's problems? Is politics the way way we solve problems? If you don't want me to start that conversation, ask questions, you want to remain ignorant. And you can give way to evil simply by doing that, and you may not know that. You may think that you are victorious in saying, I can change this, and we can put this politician in, and we can change that, and oh, if we just give people money, they can do this and that, and just because they can do all those things does not make them free. Freedom is the ability to choose what you want to do with your life, but in order to keep that freedom, you need to understand what it is. See, a slave can be given their freedom, but if they still believe in their slavery, they will just become a slave again. And so if people give way to this cycle, then it's just going to happen again and again. So there wouldn't be a reason why this guy created this cycle if it wasn't for education. There wouldn't be a reason why I made this video if it wasn't for education. There wouldn't be a reason why we talk about slavery if it weren't for preventing slavery from occurring again, or understanding that there's other forms present, and the abolitionists told us themselves. Thank you very much for watching. This is Corangelot. Nature is the answer.